This recording is of a presentation on the formative years of Myron Spaulding's life that I gave at the Spaulding Wooden Boat Center on September 24th, 2024. I first walked into Myron's boatyard at the foot of Gate 5 Road in Sausalito in 1978. I had been referred to Myron by the design office of Sparkman and Stevens in Manhattan as perhaps the only boatyard in America where the owner designed wood sailboats and built his own designs. I was to work alongside Myron for the next 20 years. When I began to work with Myron, he was in his mid-70s, a reflective time of life. While we worked, Myron occasionally recounted memories of his long and richly lived life. It was wonderful listening to his tales, but I was, even while I listened, aware that I would only remember a fraction of what he so richly recounted. So when I agreed to do this talk, I started doing research to supplement my memories and found myself drawn deeply into Myron's remarkable life. In this talk, I will share with you some of what I heard from Myron and some of what I discovered in my research, mainly about the early years of Myron's life. When Myron died in 2000, Tom Miller and I were appointed executors of Myron's estate. We faced the dilemma of taking care of the vast amount of memories Myron had saved over his long life. It was a daunting task and a huge responsibility. We decided to donate his papers and drawings to the San Francisco Maritime Museum Library for preservation. Today, this library is called the San Francisco Maritime National Historic Park Research Center. That turned out to be the right decision. The Research Center has done a most remarkable job archiving Myron's papers, photographs, and drawings. The Spaulding collection is now beautifully organized and cataloged and available for anyone to see. I want particularly to acknowledge Gina Bardi, the extraordinary reference librarian at the Research Center, and Sarah Diamond, who spent many weeks here 24 years ago packing and listing Myron's papers and most of his drawings. Some of my listeners may know a great deal about Myron, some possibly more than I. But for those of you who don't know much about Myron, I will do a brief sketch of who he was. Myron Spaulding was a highly skilled and a successful sailor, a superior designer of boats such as the 50-foot Swami, shown in this photograph, and a highly esteemed boat builder. He was influential in establishing the rules of yacht racing, and he made his living playing the violin. Quoting from Thomas Scahill's 1999 entry on Myron in the Encyclopedia of Yacht Designers, Myron Spaulding was a legend on San Francisco Bay and the West Coast. His keen intelligence, precise memory, immense fund of knowledge and experience, and longevity all combined to establish him as the Dean of West Coast Naval Architects. Quite a remarkable achievement for a mostly self-educated orphan. Myron's life in and around boats has been spoken of often in articles and excellent talks given at yacht clubs such as the Corinthian and the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco. I will speak but little of this aspect of his life. As I immersed myself in Myron's story, I became increasingly fascinated by those parts of his life that have not been covered in depth. His childhood, his youth, and his career as a violinist. Myron was, in all likelihood, a genius. But every genius is also a person, and observing them as a person in no way diminishes our admiration for them as a genius. I knew Myron primarily as a boat builder. In approaching a job, Myron insisted on first achieving a deep level of understanding of the problem at hand, and only then acting based on his understanding. In this regard, I thought of Myron as a person of great integrity. I wondered, how did he get to be this way? I spent many weeks reading in his archives at the Maritime Museum Library. Then I took a trip to Eureka, where Myron was born on October 28th, 1905. As a boy, Myron lived with his mother and brother in a small wooden house on the outskirts of Eureka. The address was 2237 2nd Street near X. This address is now a bus parking lot. But walking the half block to the dead end of 2nd Street, I took the picture on the left, undoubtedly the very same view Myron saw when he was a child. A half block in the other direction, at the end of X Street, were the railroad tracks. One can imagine that as a young child, Myron observed scenes like this trainload of logs coming into the mills of Eureka. In the oral history tapes at the Sausalito Historical Society, we can hear Myron recount childhood memories. His earliest memories are of seeing huge logs being sawed in the mill near his home. He remembered, quote, the sound of the blades whining like the dickens. And like any young boy, he remembered the excitement of horse-drawn fire engines close to where he lived, brass bells ringing and dogs barking. Often the sounds of things were vivid in his descriptions. I just couldn't resist the picture on the left. The enormous plank of clear redwood, almost 6 feet wide and 12 feet long. The image itself suggests the reverence the lumbermen of the time felt for the wood they were milling, and I think it speaks to the importance that wood held for Myron throughout his life, whether in the form of a violin or a sailboat. Myron's parents were married in 1899. His father, Willis Carroll Spaulding, was 42 and had been married at least once before. He was almost 20 years older than Myron's mother, May Elizabeth Colby. 3 children were born in 5 years. Their first child died at the age of 2. Myron's brother, named after his father, was born 2 years before Myron. Myron's father was what was called a scaler, a lumber surveyor who worked in the woods, often far away from home. Interestingly, he worked together with a son from his first marriage. Myron's young mother was left to raise the 2 boys alone in the small wooden house on the edge of Eureka. His parents lived in 2 different worlds. This is an image of Myron's father's world, woodsman out in the field. We can imagine that Myron's father might have been the man in the middle with his arms crossed. Note a few children with their fathers and the many young high school-age boys in the front row. This is the first photo we have of Myron when he was about 4 years old. That's Myron on the right. His mother and his brother Willis on the left. Myron's handwriting on the back of the photo identifies the date and who's who. The family occasionally visited his father in the forests, inland near Mount Shasta. Though the distance overland was shorter, it was far easier to sail to San Francisco on one of the many steam schooners, like the Vanguard, the Salila, or the City of Topeka. The Vanguard was designed to carry 18 passengers and up to 375,000 board feet of lumber. Myron talks of a trip he took with his brother when he was about 6 or 7 to visit his father in Castilla, near the Castle Craigs. He remembered sailing to San Francisco, taking a ferry to Oakland, and the train to Castilla. His brother Ralph, 15 years older than Myron, picked them up from the train. Myron remembered being hot and having spots all over. He spent the entire visit in bed with the measles. During this same time, Myron's mother met a man with whom she fell in love. We know that on September 21st, 1913, when Myron was 7, she moved with this man to San Francisco and subsequently disappeared from Myron's life. This must have been a desperate move for Myron's young mother. These two pictures are of May Elizabeth. The one on the left was taken in Eureka. The one on the right, some years later, shows a much happier woman living in Michigan. Myron's father tried to care for his two young children. We have this early image of Willis Carroll Spaulding, taken probably before Myron was born. Myron saved a letter he received from his father when he was 9. His father acknowledges having received a letter from Myron, and it starts out by saying, "I wish you could get 100% in arithmetic every day, but I know that's more difficult than all the rest." He promises to come back home the next year and be closer to Myron. In what may be an effort to temper Myron's enthusiasm, he says, "You'd better mind your P's and Q's or you might get a licking once in a while." He reassures Myron, or perhaps himself, that Myron has a good home with his Uncle Ed. His intentions to create a home for Myron never materialized. But what I find remarkable is that we have this letter at all. Myron saved countless boxes of correspondence. I think this suggests the insecurity that lived in him all his life as a result of his being abandoned at age 7. Myron is 8 years old in this picture, taken shortly after his mother left. Quite bluntly, he recounts, "My family busted up when I was 7. He remembers his father asking him what instrument he wanted to play. Since his brother played the piano and Myron was tired of listening to him practice, Myron replied, "Anything but the piano." The next night, his father came home with a 3/4 size violin. Myron started taking violin lessons from a woman in Eureka named Anna Mae Kelly. This picture might include Anna Mae Kelly and her students. Myron is on the lower right. Myron's father tried his best. At first, he hired a housekeeper in an effort to keep the family together, but soon Myron was farmed out to live with various relatives and foster families. He tells of living for a period of time with the family of a non-union longshoreman. Myron remembered hearing him argue with his neighbor, a Dutch union carpenter, who, quote, berated the longshoreman I was living with. I couldn't understand all this. That Myron remembered this almost 90 years later speaks to the very important role unions played in his early life. Myron remembers, I had a miserable time for the next 3 or 4 years. On one of his occasional trips to San Francisco on the steam schooner, Myron recounts that the captain, knowing that his young passenger could play the violin, insisted that Myron play for the passengers out on the ocean. Myron remembers, I was lousy. But Myron continued to enjoy life as best he could. He was at first exposed to boats as a result of his desire to learn to swim. The Sequoia Yacht Club, built in 1904 on an island facing Eureka, had a swimming pool. The pool was built like a ship, redwood planks caulked with oakum. He sailed over on a steam wheel ferry named the Antelope, a stern wheel ferry named the Antelope. Myron was already then very skinny. His description of his difficulty swimming is classic Myron. You had to have more than a certain volume for a certain poundage, and if you didn't float. So I had a hell of a time floating in the swimming pool. I had to work like the devil to keep my nose above water. He was invited to sail in boats like the ones in this picture. Myron remembered being puzzled that they were filled with concrete, He later realized that this was done in an effort to keep the boats, designed for sailing on the sheltered waters of the East Coast, to enable the boats to handle the strong winds of Humboldt Bay. In 1916, when Myron was 11, remember, this was in the middle of World War II, the submarine H-3 went ashore on the beach of Samoa, the huge sand spit that forms Humboldt Bay. Sightseers, including Myron, came to see the wreck. The Navy sent a cruiser, the Milwaukee, to pull the submarine off. The Milwaukee, too, went ashore on the bar, and the efforts to save the crew and the ship provided further entertainment for the next few months. Myron recounts how the Milwaukee was eventually taken off in pieces. He was fascinated that the submarine was rolled across the sand dunes to the Humboldt Bay side of the bar, and relaunched using techniques developed by the lumber industry for moving huge logs. Finally, when he was 14, Myron got on the Vanguard one more time. His father had recently been declared incompetent. I was never able to figure out why this drastic move was taken, but we know that Myron and his brother were made wards of the court. A guardian, William S. Curie, was appointed to oversee all aspects of Myron and his brother's life until they reached maturity. For the next 5 years, Myron lived at the Boys' Aid Society of California, described as a boarding home for working boys, on Baker Street in San Francisco. From the little I could find out about it, the Boys' Aid Society sounds rather bleak. The organization presented its mission as finding suitable homes or employment for at-risk boys, many homeless, neglected, or abused, and continuing to provide oversight and systematic attention over time. The society received wards of the court and juvenile offenders from counties in Central and Northern California who were in danger of being imprisoned. This home was an attempt to address the harsh conditions that orphans experienced at the time. Note the motto on their letterhead: "Every boy is entitled to a fair chance to make good." For Myron, this was an alternative to a life in the woods. The boys' home provided Myron with a stability he had not had since he lost his mother. It must have been a highly structured life, but he remembers being pleased that as one of the older boys, he had his own room, which allowed him to practice the violin as much as he wanted. All his life, Myron had a quality that caused those people who liked him to like him very much. At the Boys' Aid Society, he found in George C. Turner, the superintendent of the home, one of those people. George Turner recognized in Myron a boy of great potential. In many respects, Turner took over the role of the father that Myron had recently lost. The boys' home was required to make regular reports of Myron's progress to the court-appointed guardian. We have a wonderful series of letters describing Myron's development through high school and until he went off on his own. Reading through these letters is very moving. Here are a few excerpts that paint a vivid picture of who Myron was at this early stage in life. In an early letter to the court, quote, "Since coming to San Francisco, Myron has but two interests, boat building and music. Of the two, his most serious thought has seemed to center on music, boat building taking more of the form of recreation, a relaxation from the almost constant practice which he has given on his borrowed violin, and that he has musical ability of a high order is the opinion of all who have heard him play, professional and layman." On May 23, 1924, Myron wrote to the court, Myron is one of the few boys that I have absolute confidence in, and I do not believe we shall be disappointed. Myron was enrolled at San Francisco's Polytechnic High School in the fall of 1920. George Turner got Myron a bicycle. Now he could ride the 1.5 miles from the boys' home to school. We have his report cards for the 4 years he spent at Poly, signed by George Turner in place of his parent. These report cards reflect clearly how Myron developed as a student and how he discovered his gifts in music, woodworking, and technical drawing. We can see that he still had trouble with math. Note the pledge Myron had to sign. I am not now, nor will I become, a member of any secret society while a pupil in the school. You wonder what this made reference to. While attending high school, Myron studied violin with Professor Sigmund Anker, a well-known Austrian violinist and violin teacher. His tuition was paid by a benefactor, a Mrs. F.H. Morley. Sigmund Anker had up to 30 students. He held auditions at the Emporium on Saturday mornings. There he discovered many talented children, including, most famously, the renowned violinist Yehudi Menuhin. After Myron finished high school, he stayed on at the boys' home for 2 more years, playing the violin and working on a boat he had built in woodshop with the help of sympathetic teachers and the complicity of janitors who let him in to work on his boat after hours. Here is a close-up of the young graduate from the fall of 1923. Poly Yearbook. Myron was still, at this time, living in the boys' home, working on a sailboat, and looking to find his way into the world of professional music. This sail plan for the original version of the 16-footer is dated 7 months before his graduation. Already now his outstanding drawing ability stands out. Many people helped him. He recounts sliding the boat out a window of the woodshop and carrying it to the San Francisco yacht harbor on a truck lent by Van Arsdale Harris, the wonderful softwood lumber yard that Myron continued to buy lumber from when he was in his 90s. He launched the boat almost a year after graduating. At this point, Myron's self-education as a yacht designer really took off. Very soon, he rebuilt the boat, this time with a ballast keel and an inboard rudder. We have some snapshots of the rebuilt boat. One day, he lent the boat to a friend and took it for a sail out in the ocean. Near Seal Rock, the little boat lost its keel. The boat got back safely, and Myron probably took it in stride. He was a voracious learner. Myron started accumulating a circle of friends involved in the beginnings of yacht racing on San Francisco Bay. A group of young men who were to figure prominently in yacht racing included Babe Stevens, Hugh Jacks, Dennis Jordan, and Myron. Became known as the Polytechnic High School Boys. The St. Francis Yacht Club was established in 1927. Here we see Myron in his new tux and violin, both paid for by Evelyn T. Morley. She was the widow of engineer Frederick H. Morley, who died tragically in a Yosemite climbing accident. He left his wife a comfortable income that she used for the support of boys at the home. I quote from George Turner's final letter to the court. Myron has certainly developed into a very high-class young man, and I feel has a successful future ahead of him. Myron was indeed to be a high-class man all his life. In August of 1924, when Myron was 18, he got into the Musicians' Union, a prerequisite for working as a musician in San Francisco. Quoting from another letter to his guardian, "The union of the music world is more autocratic than the Kaiser once was." There was a flurry of letters from the boys' home about his progress in finding work as a musician. Their complete faith in Myron is obvious, though everyone was clearly a little nervous until he actually started getting jobs that affirmed their confidence. I clearly remember Myron speaking of the pleasure he experienced going from venue to venue of vaudeville and silent film houses playing music. In this map, you can see how many of the big theaters were clustered around Market Street and the Civic Center. The map illustrates the great importance of this type of entertainment in the years before people had radios and television. During the same time, a huge corruption scandal rocked San Francisco. It had started during Myron's childhood. Eugene Handsome Jean Schmitz, a violinist in the San Francisco Symphony and president of the Musicians Union, was the San Francisco mayor from 1901 to 1907, including during the 1906 earthquake. In 1907, Schmitz was found guilty of extortion and bribery and sentenced to San Quentin. Though his conviction was nullified on a technicality, he was never re-elected as mayor, though he did serve on the Board of Supervisors from 1917 to 1926. Growing up in this time of rampant political corruption, so closely entwined with his own world, might explain why, later in life, Myron understood many events as instances of corruption. Still, even while running between music venues on the side, Myron was corresponding with the foremost boat designers in Northern Europe, including Johann Anker, who designed the Dragon, and Knut Reimers, considered one of the most important Scandinavian yacht designers of the 20th century. During the decade of 1925 to 1935, Myron owned and made a name for himself, sailing a Star boat, number 389, the Dragon Björn, and the 6-meter Saga, as well as one of the first bird boats, the Loon. And a lot was going on around San Francisco during this period. The lavish Fox Theater also opened in 1929. Myron recounted the thrill of riding up in the orchestra pit of the Fox Theater as it rose on its mechanical lift to the front of the stage. Myron accumulated a huge collection of music scores for use in the many venues in which he played. Myron talked to me about the expectation that musicians would be able to improvise programs to suit the action on the screen. Different music for chase scenes, romantic scenes, dramatic scenes. That was up to the musician. Playing for silent movies was a demanding profession. When he was 24, Myron was rushed to the hospital with a burst appendix. He was to spend the next 3.5 months there. He was operated on 3 times for appendicitis and resulting peritonitis. We have a letter from his Uncle Ed in Forestville. I was sorry to hear you came near losing your life. That was a close call, and I'm glad you're improving now. 2 years later, in 1931, Myron signed his first contract with the symphony. Finally, he was set financially. For his entire 30 years as a musician, Myron made a good living playing the violin. I used to think this was just his day job that supported his true passion, sailing. I see it differently now. Myron was clearly a gifted musician. I think it is misleading to underestimate the importance of music in his life. Music was Myron's path away from the woods, but it was also a profession he dedicated himself to. As talkies took over and vaudeville disappeared, Myron played steadily with the symphony, the opera, and the ballet. The question for me is, how did music inform and influence his life as a designer and boat builder? I think Myron had certain sensibilities and skills that he applied to both these apparently disparate disciplines. As unlikely as it seems, there are parallels. Myron played under 5 different conductors during his years playing for the symphony. He talked about all of them. He told me how he especially liked the Spanish-American conductor Enrique Horta, because he was, quote, no nonsense, in contrast with other, more flamboyant directors. Here we see some pictures of Myron in the San Francisco Symphony between 1937 and 1955. That's Myron in costume on the left. Playing with the opera may occasionally have been somewhat embarrassing, but the pay was good. An opera contract dated October 1937, we see Myron earned what corresponds to $2,000 a week in today's dollar, and an additional $550 per performance. Often he performed multiple times in a day. Myron was increasingly busy juggling his dual interests, music and sailing. Myron's Union notebook from 1936 shows the intense schedule he maintained. Note the Union meetings printed in the calendar. Sometimes he would play 3 or 4 opera performances in one day. On Tuesday, April 2nd, we see squeezed in the first mention of the upcoming Honolulu race. Myron also worked in George Whalen's design office during this period, which helped him in his later career as official measurer for the Yacht Racing Association. In 1933, Myron attended the Humboldt Evening High School at the Ferry Building to study navigation, a skill that was to serve him well. This was to be his only year of formal education beyond high school. The next year, he proudly invested in a sextant. On July 4th, 1936, Myron skippered the already famous Sparkman and Stevens 52-foot yawl Dorade in the Honolulu race, coming in first in the fleet and first on corrected time. A huge triumph for a 30-year-old violinist. Aren't these wonderful pictures of the young Myron? They're some of the few photographs we have of Myron dressed in other than a shirt and tie. Perhaps the only image we have of Myron exhibiting both of his interests. Here he poses with a viola on board Odyssey, which he skippered in the 1939 Transpac. During the years leading up to World War II, Myron worked with Herb Madden Sr. at the Madden & Lewis Yard here in Sausalito. Myron greatly admired Herb Madden, and the yard itself had a profound influence on Myron. By now, Myron had developed a reputation as a designer, and the next year, Walter Anderson commissioned him to design what became the 38-foot Naughty-Gal, built by Anderson and Christophany for Max Blum. Naughty-Gal was Myron's first design to gain wide recognition. Shortly after war was declared in Europe, Myron applied to the U.S. Naval Reserve. Though he was highly qualified and had many excellent references, his appointment was denied. The official explanation cited his being 37 pounds underweight, the same problem he had had trying to learn to swim. In later years, Myron suggested corruption. The sale of commissions was the cause of his denial. Around this time, Myron had resumed communication with his mother, who had moved to Michigan. They were to correspond for the next 33 years. We have a series of 40 letters from his mother, all addressed, "Dear Son," and signed, "Your Mom." Myron went to visit his mother in Michigan. Here, she looks quite happy. He looks conflicted, torn between the trauma of being abandoned at an early age and his happiness in finally being reunited with his mother. During the war years, Myron continued juggling his different interests. Along with playing violin, he ran his own design office at 617 Montgomery Street in San Francisco and worked in the engineering department at Madden & Lewis and did survey work for the War Service Administration. In this picture, Myron is in the back row of the crew of Madden & Lewis. They were building wooden minesweepers and 110-foot subchasers for the U.S. and British navies. The launching of Swami in 1947 was big news. Swami was considered a hopeful contender for the Honolulu race of that year. Arvid Johnson, a house carpenter from Finland, was another of those friends who played a major role in Myron's life. Myron recalls how right after the war, 1945-46, Arvid and a group of his friends had asked Myron to design an easy-to-build plywood 33-footer. Arvid found a lot out on Hunter's Point where he and his friends built a number of the boats. Myron evidently bought fasteners and fittings which he tried to sell to the individual builders of the 33s. Among Myron's many gifts, one would not include an aptitude for business. Repeatedly throughout his life, he found himself having made less than ideal business decisions. His agreement with his friends Cliff Peterson and Shirley Morgan to sell them the plans for the 20-foot Clipper-class sailboat was another. Over 60 of these beautiful little boats were built, but by the terms of the agreement, Myron received no further compensation beyond the initial sale of the design. In the mid-40s, Myron began to design what he called his when and if boatyard for a site at McNear's Beach in Santa Fe. It was to be in the Steamer Gold warehouse, an abandoned building near a brick factory. Myron talks of building the 36-foot buoyant girl there, together with his friend Bob Crowley. For me, it is a mystery how the two friends built and launched Buoyant Girl in a year. Myron spoke often of the many friends who helped him. Bob Crowley, Ed Letter, Lorna Ralston, Joe McAleese, and Don Duncan were there at this time, along with many others. In an interview with Annie Sutter, Myron says, "Boy, if it weren't for friends, I'd never have had a boatyard." Myron designed himself a comfortable little apartment upstairs in his when and if boatyard. I think having a place to live, though never of primary concern to Myron, was always something of an issue for him. In the 10 years between 1926, when he moved out of the Boys Aid Society, and 1936, he had 5 different addresses around San Francisco. Even at the end of his life, Myron always maintained a bunk and a basic living facilities in his office. Under mysterious circumstances, Myron lost his lease at McNear's Beach and again, with the help of friends, moved all his machines and lumber to Sausalito. He bought the marine ship property in 1951 and over the next few years, together with Arvid Johnson, built the yard, much as it is today. He resigned from the symphony around 1956. Myron's personal life was always distinctly segmented from his professional life. I think we can understand this a little better now in the light of the events of his life that we have been talking about. This defining feature of Myron's life is described with great insight and humor in a letter written to Myron by his old friend Commodore Tompkins. I quote, "We are a trifle uncertain about the news from Sausalito regarding you and Gladys. We got a very nice Christmas card from Gladys, which indicated she had a brand new surname. The preceding letter from you indicated that you had a brand new crane. By careful comparison of postmarks, we decided that Gladys got hers before you got yours, And the gentlemanly thing for you to have done would at least have been to have mentioned the event. This letter is dated January 31st, 1963. By the time of this letter, Myron and Gladys had been married 2 months earlier on November 22nd, 1963. By the time of this letter, Myron had been working on his yard in Sausalito for 8 years. Myron had stopped playing in the symphony to apply his full attention to building the 45-foot Chrysopoly, which he finally launched in 1961. In 1955, when Myron was 50 years old, a new phase of his life had started. The story of the building of Chrysopoly and everything that came after is a dramatic tale in itself. But I would like to leave the entire story of Myron's life after 1955 for another time. Thank you for listening.